In a quiet mountain town, a bookshop owner and a passing architect find themselves drawn into something soft, slow, and almost real. But some stories aren't about the ending. They're about the silence between the pages. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The library smelled like sun-warmed paper and lavender polish, the kind that clung to wooden shelves long after the janitor left. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet that made you tiptoe instinctively, even though no one ever said you had to. Elena liked Tuesdays. Few people came in on Tuesdays, and the ones who did usually left her alone. She was shelving a stack of worn nonfiction, local history mostly, when she heard the faint creak of the front door, the soft chime overhead announcing a newcomer. She didn't look up at first. People came in and out all day. But then there was a pause, a silence too deliberate to ignore. "Sorry," a voice said, low and unfamiliar. "Do you work here?" She turned. He stood a few feet away, taller than she expected, maybe early 30s, dressed in an olive green jacket and jeans dusty from travel. He had that look, half expectant, half apologetic, like he wasn't sure if he'd made a mistake stepping in. "I volunteer," Elena said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "The librarian's out sick. Can I help?" He held up a folded sheet of paper, an old blueprint, yellowing at the corners. "I'm trying to find anything you have on the old train station. My dad says there used to be plans stored here. I'm restoring it." That caught her interest. No one had touched the station in years. It stood on the edge of town like a ghost, half collapsed, covered in ivy and graffiti, ignored by everyone except photographers and raccoons. She gave him a look, not skeptical, just curious. "You're restoring it? That's ambitious." He smiled, and it softened the edges of his otherwise serious face. "That's the nice way of saying it's a terrible idea." "No," she said. "That's the polite way. The terrible idea part comes after you show me the full scope of your delusion." He laughed. A real one. It echoed lightly through the stacks, and she found herself smiling despite herself. "Elena," she offered, extending a hand. "Liam." The handshake was brief but warm. He had calloused fingers, not soft like she expected from someone who worked with blueprints. Maybe he built things himself. She liked that. She led him through the narrow rows of shelving, navigating them with the confidence of someone who'd wandered their labyrinth since childhood. He followed, watching the way her cardigan sleeve slipped off her shoulder before she tugged it back up. They spent the next hour digging through the archives. Dusty folders, curled photos, forgotten minutes from council meetings in the 70s. At some point, they sat cross-legged on the floor like kids. She read aloud while he took notes, asking questions with genuine interest, listening like every word mattered. Time blurred. Eventually, the light through the high windows turned golden, and the shadows stretched long across the floor. The silence between them had shifted. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, familiar in a way that made no logical sense. She checked her watch and stood, brushing dust from her jeans. "Library closes at 6. He looked up at her and blinked, surprised. "Already?" She nodded. "Told you it was a terrible idea." He stood too, slower this time, reluctant. "Thanks for the help. I'll come back tomorrow. If that's okay." She shrugged, casual. "I'll probably be here." And that was it. No declarations. No sudden romance. Just the flicker of something unspoken. The beginning of a story neither of them realized was starting. As she locked up and walked home in the fading light, Elena found herself smiling. She didn't know much about Liam, but she had a feeling she'd see him again. And part of her hoped she would. It rained the next day, the kind of steady, unhurried rain that painted the town in shades of gray and silver. The bookstore felt smaller in weather like this, warmer too, like it was wrapped in wool. The windows fogged at the corners, and the bell above the door chimed soft and tired, as if even it knew to speak gently. Elena was rearranging the poetry section when she heard the bell. Liam stepped in, brushing droplets from his jacket. His hair was damp, curls forming just enough to make him look softer than yesterday. He glanced around, caught her eye, and smiled like he'd been hoping she'd be there. "You're a little lost," she said, leaning against the bookshelf. "This isn't the library." "I know," he replied, setting his sketchbook and a to-go cup on the counter. "I thought I'd try something reckless. Like buying a book." She raised an eyebrow. "That is dangerous. You could fall down a rabbit hole and never come out." "I'd take my chances." They talked then, in that slow, meandering way that only rainy afternoons seemed to allow. She brewed tea in the back, chai for her, black for him, and they sat near the window where the rain streaked down like brushstrokes. It turned out he'd grown up here, left after high school, and stayed gone for nearly a decade. She hadn't remembered him. Too many years apart, too many faces forgotten, but he remembered the town. Every crack in the sidewalks. Every storm drain that flooded when it rained like this. He told her about his work, mostly residential design, some renovation. Nothing glamorous. Just making old things breathe again, he said. She told him about the bookstore, how she'd inherited it from her aunt, how she sometimes stayed late just to be around the books when no one else was. "It's weird," she said. "I like it better when it's quiet. Like they talk more when nobody's here." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. The hours stretched like soft fabric, gentle and unhurried. Outside, the rain fell harder, but inside, time seemed to fold in on itself. She watched him sketch in the margins of his notebook, loose lines of rooftops and arches, and wondered what he saw when he looked at the world. At some point, they argued lightly over books. She defended Jane Austen like a sister. He swore by Hemingway's precision. They didn't agree, but the disagreement was playful, almost flirtatious. "Let me guess," she teased. "You think Darcy's overrated." "I think he's socially constipated," Liam said, grinning. "But in a charming way." She laughed, a full, genuine laugh that made the bookstore feel brighter despite the storm outside. When he finally stood to leave, it was dusk, and the sky had softened into slate. He hesitated at the door, one hand on the handle, the other still in his pocket, like he was weighing something unsaid. "I'll bring you that sketch tomorrow," he said. "Of the train station." "I'll hold you to it," she replied, tucking her legs beneath her on the reading bench. He left with a nod, the bell chiming again, soft, familiar. And when the door swung closed and the air settled again, Elena noticed the scent he'd left behind, a mix of rain, cedar, and something else she couldn't quite name. She closed the shop an hour later, cardigan pulled tight, and stepped into the drizzle feeling just a little warmer than before. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt suspiciously like routine. Liam would stop by the bookstore every other day, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with sketches. He never stayed too long, just long enough for conversation to find its rhythm and leave something unsaid. Elena never asked if he had other errands, or if she was the only reason he came. She didn't want to know the answer. Not yet. One Wednesday afternoon, the rain had stopped, and the bookstore glowed with the low, slanted light of a sun that was finally brave enough to show its face. Elena was reorganizing a shelf in the corner, one of those odd little displays of vintage books nobody really bought. She dusted them more out of fondness than obligation. As she flipped through an old collection of local essays, leather-bound, frayed spine, no barcode, something slipped out from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. A letter, cream-colored, folded twice, edges yellowed. Her name wasn't on it, nor was there a stamp or envelope. Just faded ink on good paper, the kind people don't use anymore. She picked it up and hesitated, long enough to make the decision count, then unfolded it. The handwriting was neat but nervous. "I should have said something when I had the chance. Maybe it would have changed nothing. Maybe it would have changed everything. But the truth is, I loved you." Quietly, helplessly. "And I still do." It wasn't signed. Elena stood there for a while, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. Not because she was moved, though she was, but because it felt like someone had left a piece of their soul behind. A relic of something unfinished. Maybe it had been hidden in the book on purpose. Maybe it was forgotten. Either way, it had found its way to her. When Liam arrived that afternoon, she was still behind the counter, the letter tucked into the front of her notebook like a bookmark. "New arrivals?" he asked, setting his coffee down beside hers. "Old ghosts, more like," she said, sliding the letter out and holding it up. "Found this between the pages of a book." He took it, read it once, then again. His expression didn't change, but something shifted, subtly like a thread pulled just tight enough to feel. That's something, he said, handing it back. It got to me, she admitted. Not in a sad way. Just reminded me how much of life stays unsaid. Liam didn't reply right away. He leaned against the counter, watching the light catch dust motes in the air. Do you think, he asked quietly, if they'd sent it, it would have changed anything? She paused. I don't know. Maybe they were too late. He looked at her then, for a beat too long. She held his gaze, something fluttering in her chest she didn't want to name yet. He broke the moment first, reaching into his sketchbook and pulling out a folded sheet. Here. Like I promised. It was a sketch of the train station, but not how it looked now. How it could look. Restored. Lit from within. Alive again. Wow, she whispered. I thought maybe, he said, if I could make something new out of something forgotten, it might be worth the effort. He didn't mean the building. Not entirely. She knew that, and for a breathless second, she wanted to tell him she understood. That she'd been doing the same with her life. But the moment passed. She slipped the letter back into her notebook and smiled instead. You're better at drawing than writing love notes. Liam chuckled. Thankfully, they didn't talk about the letter again. But it stayed with both of them, like a ghost they quietly agreed not to exorcise. Summer edged into the edges of spring, tentative and slow. The mountains hadn't yet shed their misty mornings, and the river still ran cold and quick, but the afternoons had begun to feel like permission. The kind of warmth that encouraged people to leave windows open, linger in doorways, or say things they'd been holding on to a little too long. Elena didn't know it would be their last ordinary day. Liam arrived early, a backpack slung over one shoulder and a foldable map in his hand. He wore a navy shirt rolled to the elbows, sleeves dusted with graphite smudges, like he'd been sketching before sunrise. I have a proposal, he said, half grinning. And no, it's not that kind of proposal. Shame, she replied, tucking a bookmark into a poetry collection. I was hoping for at least a dramatic speech and a modestly priced ring. I'll keep that in mind for next time, he said, stepping inside. I want to take you somewhere. Just for the day. She didn't ask where. Didn't need to. The tone in his voice, equal parts hope and hesitation, was enough. They drove out of town with the windows down and a thermos of tea between them, the hills rolling open like a story still being written. The trailhead was half hidden behind an old water tower and marked by a wooden sign bleached soft by years of wind and sun. It wasn't an easy hike, but it wasn't hard either. Just long enough to quiet the noise in her head. They didn't talk much on the way up. There was something in the air between them, not tension exactly. More like gravity. A slow, invisible pull that neither of them wanted to name for fear it might disappear. At the top, the trail opened to a ledge that overlooked the whole town. Below, the river coiled like a silver ribbon through trees and rooftops, glinting in the late sun. They sat on a flat rock, boots side by side, thermos passed between them in silence. I used to come here when I was a kid, Liam said. When everything felt too loud. Still does, Elena murmured. He looked at her, and this time she didn't look away. There was a question in his eyes, not a dramatic one, not a movie scene kind of thing. Just a soft, quiet wondering. Are you feeling this too? Are we pretending too hard? She answered it, not in words, but by leaning slightly, just enough for her shoulder to rest against his. He didn't move. He just let her stay there. And that was it. No kiss. No declaration. Just her head on his shoulder, his hand resting inches from hers. A shared stillness. It was the kind of moment that should have changed everything. But when the sun dipped behind the hills and the air turned cool, they stood and brushed off their jeans and walked back down in silence. That night, as she unlocked the door to her apartment, Elena paused. She stood there for a full minute, key still in the lock, wondering what exactly they had built between them. Not quite love. Not quite not. Something tender. Something real. And something very, very close to impossible. 3 days passed before Liam said anything about the city. It was late evening when he brought it up, the air outside thick with the hum of distant thunder. The bookstore was already closed, but Elena had stayed behind, half organizing, half pretending she wasn't waiting for him to show up again. He did on cue, like always, carrying a half-eaten apple and a manila folder under his arm. Busy? He asked, glancing around. Only with avoiding responsibility. That's an art, he said, dropping the folder on the counter. Got a minute? She nodded, expecting another sketch, maybe new blueprints for the train station. But he didn't open the folder. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck and said, almost casually, "So, I've been offered a job. In Boston." The words settled between them like dust, silent and slow. Elena blinked. Boston. Yeah. He smiled, but it was the tight kind of smile, the one people wear when they're trying to keep something from unraveling. It's big. Lots of clients. The kind of project that only comes around once. She nodded slowly. That's great. Really. It doesn't feel great, he admitted. It just feels like the thing I'm supposed to want. A long pause. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. She looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to imagine him gone. Not just from the bookstore or her afternoon routine, but from the landscape of her days entirely. Do you think you'll go? She asked, voice soft. He hesitated. I think. I'd be stupid not to. And there it was. The answer tucked inside the not-quite admission. He was leaving. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon enough for it to start mattering. She nodded again, too many times, too quickly. Right. Of course. Elena, he began, and the way he said her name made her wish he hadn't. She didn't want comfort. Not from him. Not for this. Don't, she said, managing a smile that felt like glass held together by heat. Don't make it into something you have to apologize for. Go. It's a great opportunity. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, I was going to ask if you'd come visit. The question wasn't small. It was enormous. It landed like a storm in her chest. She forced a laugh. I don't do cities. They make me anxious. Too many people. Too much noise. Right, he said. I figured. But he hadn't. Not really. And they both knew it. She walked him to the door like nothing was broken, like there wasn't a sudden, invisible crack running through everything they hadn't said. Before he stepped outside, he turned to her, hesitated, and then reached out like he was going to touch her shoulder. But he didn't. He dropped his hand. I'll see you, he said. And she answered, yeah, though she wasn't sure when or if that would be true. Then the door clicked shut, and she stood alone behind the counter, the air thick and buzzing like the moment before lightning strikes. It had all felt like a bridge they were building together, slow, careful, stone by stone. But now, halfway across, she could already see it ending. A span unfinished. A crossing never made. The night before Liam left, the town felt strangely quiet, as if it knew something was ending. Clouds gathered low over the rooftops, heavy and slow, like they didn't want to leave either. Elena stood in her apartment doorway for a long time before stepping out. She didn't bring a coat, didn't bring an umbrella. Just her hands in her pockets and a single, unspoken hope. The river trail was mostly empty, just a few porch lights glowing in the distance, and the sound of water moving steadily beneath the old iron bridge. She found him where she hoped she would, leaning against the railing, eyes on the current. He didn't turn when she walked up, but he said, I wasn't sure if you'd come. I wasn't sure either. Silence settled in. Not cold. Not bitter. Just weighty. Like the air knew to hold its breath. I packed light, Liam said. Didn't want to take much with me. Less to lose, she murmured. He glanced at her, eyes soft. I don't want to lose this. Elena didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the river, where the moonlight split across the surface like threads coming undone. You can't take all of it with you, she said. Some things just stay here. Like the river. Like me. The ache between them was palpable, so close to confession, so close to something that might have changed everything if they'd only been braver. But instead, Liam reached into his pocket and handed her something small. A stone, flat, smooth, dark gray. You always said you liked things with weight. She turned it over in her hand, thumb tracing the surface. Thanks. He stepped back then, just slightly, like he was already disappearing. Boston's not forever, he said. She nodded. But it's not here. And in that moment, they both understood what they hadn't dared say aloud. That this wasn't a pause. It was an ending. Not dramatic. Not devastating. Just the quiet closing of a chapter that never had a proper title. Liam leaned down and kissed her forehead. Soft. Reverent. The kind of kiss you give when your heart is too full and your words too late. Then he walked away, slowly, deliberately, like a man trying to memorize every step as he took it. Elena stayed on the bridge long after he was gone. She didn't cry. She just held the stone in her palm and watched the river carry everything away. Autumn arrived like a deep breath, crisp, golden, unhurried. The kind of season that makes people nostalgic for things they can't quite name. Liam had been gone for 3 months. Elena measured time differently now. Not in weeks or weekends, but in postcards. The first one came 2 weeks after he left. No return address, just a cafe on the front, brick walls, ivy-covered, a dog tied to a bike rack. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Thought this place looked like something out of your favorite novel. No pastries as good as yours, though. She smiled when she read it. Didn't cry. Didn't respond either. Another came a month later. This one a pencil sketch of a clock tower. He'd drawn it himself, the lines clean and deliberate. On the back he'd written, "City's loud. People don't look each other in the eye here. Miss the quiet." That one she kept by the register, tucked behind the pen holder where no one could see it but her. There were 4 more after that. Each one less personal, more observational. Like he didn't know what to say anymore, but still wanted to be remembered. She read every one. Filed them all into a wooden box she kept under her bed, between old receipts and half-filled journals. The bookstore kept going. She started a weekly book club. Rearranged the poetry section. Repainted the front windows herself, something she'd always meant to do. Customers came and went. The world didn't stop, not even a little, even when it felt like it should have. People stopped asking about him eventually. At first, they said things like, "When's Liam back?" or "He and Elena made such a great team." She just smiled, gave vague answers. Eventually, the questions faded. But sometimes, when the light hit the shelves just right, or a customer ordered their coffee black with no sugar, or she passed by the river trail on the way home, something inside her would ache, soft and familiar. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. More like the echo of a song you still remember all the words to, but haven't heard in years. She never told anyone about the stone he gave her. It sat on her nightstand now, beside a lamp and a dog-eared paperback. Sometimes, when she couldn't sleep, she'd hold it in her hand and pretend it was still warm from his. And though she never wrote him back, she sometimes thought of what she'd say if she did. "I still talk to you, just not out loud." It had been 4 years. Long enough for most things to settle. The bookstore had grown, slowly, like ivy, expanding into the space next door. Elena now hosted writing workshops on Sundays and kept a small gallery wall of handwritten letters people had found in old books. Not one of them had a return address. That was the rule. She hadn't thought of Liam in weeks. Not until the wedding. It was a mutual friend, someone from the town council, one of those people who seemed permanently half-involved in everyone's lives. Elena didn't know why she went, really. Maybe out of obligation. Maybe out of something else. She saw him before he saw her. Liam was standing near the edge of the garden, drink in hand, listening politely to someone talk about hardwood floors. His hair was shorter. He wore a gray suit that fit too well to be new. And next to him, a woman with warm eyes and a quiet smile gently touched his arm as she laughed. Elena didn't flinch. She just watched. Eventually, he noticed her. Their eyes met across the crowd. No surprise, no tension. Just a flicker of something small and steady, like candlelight in a draft. Later, they found each other by the dessert table, where the cakes were cut too early and the punch was already watered down. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied, smiling. "You look well. You look like you still drink too much tea." She laughed softly. Some habits survive. They talked for a few minutes. Books, the bookstore, the weather. He mentioned he'd moved again, just outside of Boston now, something quieter. His wife taught literature at a local high school. He said it like he was proud of her. Elena liked that. When the music started, he didn't ask her to dance. She didn't ask him to stay. They didn't say anything about the river, or the postcards, or the kiss that never happened. There was no need. As he walked back toward the reception, he turned one last time and gave her a look that said, "Thank you. I remember. Me too." And then he was gone. Later, Elena took the long way home, down the path by the river. The same one where they'd walked so many times, in silence and in almosts. The water still ran swift around the bend, carrying everything forward, always just out of reach. She sat on the old bench beneath the sycamore tree, the stone he gave her still tucked in her coat pocket. A breeze stirred the leaves above. The air smelled like lavender and the coming rain. She closed her eyes. Not all stories end with forever. Some just end with once. And that sometimes is enough.